Hi. Um, I'm going to do a presentation on the China National Space Administration, the CNSA. The CNSA is responsible for the planning and policy of China's space program. The China Aerospace Corporation, CASC, was tasked with the execution before it was broken up in 1998 into smaller government-owned, privately managed companies meant to imitate the defense industry of the West. Before CNSA, there was ballistic missile research and space technology happening. It was thought to be started by men like, and I apologize for any of the mispronunciations, Qian Yusen, who was also a co-founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It is thought, and thought is in quotes here, because all the information is filtered through the state media. So the information about the China CNSA is not very forthcoming. They do have a website, and it keeps missions updated for the most part, and promotes those successes well, actually. But there's not a whole lot on there about structure, history, anything like that. The logo for the CNSA is this little symbol in the middle, followed by 3 rings and some olive leaves. The arrow in the middle is similar to the Chinese character, this, whatever that is, I guess, which means human or people. The rings represent the various escape velocities. So the first circle is the minimum speed to reach sustainable orbit. And the second one, which is in bold, because this is what they've achieved thus far, or wish to achieve this far, I think, is to escape the Earth system. I think this is the one they're shooting for now. And the third one is to escape the solar system. So those are the 3 escape velocities centered around humans. And then they added on some olive branches for symbolized peace. So the CNSA also, they have a division. They have a division for human spaceflight or human activities called the China Manned Space Administration, the CMSA, which confused me greatly at first. So the first taikonaut, which is the taiko is Mandarin for space, or the taikong is Mandarin for space. Apology for the ad. They first reached space in 2003 on the Shenzhou 5, or the Shenzhou 5, a spacecraft based on the Russian Soyuz. The craft, it started with that. Then they also say that the Chinese engineers updated it and enhanced the design. And that was the craft that took Chinese humans to space. This is what I was getting to.
All the men and women who have devoted their lives to exploring the unknown. That legacy is the everlasting power of the human civilization and progress, and is the inevitable choice for human to expand their living space. The unremitting exploration of the vast universe will always advance human civilization forward a higher level in the future. China has been striding along the path of space exploration as well. In October 2003, Chinese people saw their homeland from outer space. And from then on, the mythology and dreams for thousands of years have become a reality realized by the first Chinese astronaut, Yang Li Wei. At this moment, the ode of "The Earth Our Homeland" and the proud of surviving during the long history became more and more clear and definite.
向世界各国人民自豪，向在太空中工作的民航们自豪。和平利用太空，造福全人类。
You'll notice it landed on land like the Soyuz capsules, with the explosion at the end to try to slow their descent and break their fall, which seems kind of brutal. Which Chris Hadfield described in his book.
On October 25th,
That
Chinese astronauts Fei Junlong and Ni Haishan entered space, stayed and worked for 5 days in orbit, 350 kilometers above the Earth, conducting man-tended space experiments. In September 2008, 3 Chinese astronauts were launched into space on board Shenzhou 7 spaceship. With the assistance and cooperation of Liu Boaming and Jing Haidang, Zhai Shigang walked out of the spaceship and performed an extravehicular activity, which lasted for 19 minutes and 35 seconds. The success of Shenzhou 7 mission indicated that China became the 3rd country with EVA technology in the world. Tiangong-1 target spacecraft and Shenzhou 8 spaceship were successively launched in September and November 2011. And China successfully conducted China's first space rendezvous and docking test, laying the foundation.
So, the Tiangong 1 was their single capsule space station. And you see the manned development of their space program sort of parallels the United States, with you're in space, more people are in space, EVA, now you're docking, and then it continues with some research. The professor already spoke about this space station a little bit in the lecture he just posted, but the Tiangong 1 was about 34 feet long and was launched in September 2011. The CNSA lost control of the capsule in March of 2016 because they were unable to fire the engines. It made an uncontrolled entry on April 2nd of this year, northwest of Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean, which, as he said, was lucky. Everyone all over the world was trying to track it to be sure that they knew it was happening. I do not believe anyone has any footage of it coming down. It's pretty sparse. Even a map of all the flights in the area, it's still pretty sparse out there. So the orbit decayed because of the very small bit of atmospheric drag that affects all low Earth orbit, even at 300 and 400 kilometers, which I thought was interesting because you still need power to maintain an orbit at 300 to 400 kilometers. So that one's gone. The Tiangong 2 has been in orbit since 2016, where they're continuing experiments. China does not participate in the ISS. Some of that might be because of the United States or countries that they do not associate with as far as their space technology. In fact, the United States doesn't associate with them either. So NASA and CNSA have a mutual exclusion policy. But before the policies, this is their registration for when Chang'e-1 was going to be discontinued, or when it landed. And here's a map of the final orbit and where it went down. So before the mutual exclusion policies, a U.S. company, Space Systems and Loral, were attempting to launch the Intelsat 708, which turned into quite a disaster because the launch exploded, and you can see it's tipping over. It ended up exploding in a local village, which the launch site was pretty isolated, but casualties for the event are disputed, but they range anywhere from 6 to about 500 deaths. Loral, the company who manufactured the satellite, they ended up paying $20 million in export violations for trying to launch in China. There are plans for the Chinese space station. And there was some news announced about it recently, I think. But it's supposed to be similar to the ISS, and they're hoping for it to be operational by 2022. The CNSA has invited all the UN states to apply for conducting science experiments. The CNSA has 4 launch sites. The latest one opening in 2016 at a lower latitude for heavier payloads necessary for human spaceflight. That'd be in the Wenchang area down here. It's actually an island in southern China. They have the Xikang, which I believe is where the Intelsat 708 disaster happened. They have the Chuyong and the Jikon. I'm awful at pronouncing these. So from these 4 launch sites is where they send all their stuff into orbit. China did have the first soft landing on the moon, on the lunar surface, in decades with a rover. It landed and it's the Chang 3, this one. It landed in 2013, but was unable to move after about 14 days, which would be considered the second lunar day. But it did gather information for 31 months, which is a record for land rovers on the moon surface. And what came out of that is a nice little 360-degree image. The panorama. Their little rover doing some donuts. A 360-degree view of the lunar surface where it landed. So the Chinese have been working internationally. They just made a deal with, I believe, Germany for some space technology. I don't know if the mutual exclusion policies of the United States and China will ever cool in the future. But they did start their research in ballistic missiles over a fear of the United States. So, but yeah, they seem to be going along pretty well on their own, especially with their human spaceflight, and seems like it's pretty well funded. And looks like we're going to have another space station pretty soon. So that's the Chinese National Space Administration, the CNSA.